English translation, 461st contact, Friday, 7th of March 2008, 23:48 hours.
You come as a pair. But both of you be warmly welcome, friends, you Ptah and also you Quetzal. It is a joy for me to see you. Be welcome.
I also greet you on my behalf, Edward. Unfortunately, it is a little later than I had envisaged because I wanted to visit you early in the evening. I was a bit worried about you because, as Florina told me, you were overdoing yourself writing the book Goblet of the Truth and suffered a physical breakdown, which also caused a breakdown of the immune system. You have exhausted yourself of your energies and powers, which you should not do again because such breakdowns are not harmless. You should put in less work and allow yourself more rest and relaxation.
That is also my thinking, my friend. But be greeted. Unfortunately, I do not have much time, so I am in a hurry, and I only came here to discuss the problems Florina told me about. I have already agreed with Ptah that we settle this matter promptly so that I can get back to my pressing duties. So if you want to give me an explanation.
Of course, dear friend. Look here, I have already discussed this with Florina in the following wise, as I printed it out on the computer for you to inspect. But may I ask you something else, because we should clarify something in the group, and I would also be very happy if you could ask Quetzal if he could come here next week or the week after next, because I have to discuss some important things with him, which are his responsibility. There are some ambiguities that need to be clarified, which should be done by the third weekend at the latest.
If things are so important, I will notify Quetzal as soon as I am back in my flying machine, and I will give you his answer. But what do you want to ask me?
Look here, please read this once.
Yes, I read it. What do you want with it?
Look here, what do you understand by taking up a regular wage work payroll employment? It is Quetzal's formulation.
In my opinion, this refers to a regular employment with a regular wage.
Aha, that is how I see it too. In other words, I would say, taking up a regular job with a regular salary and a regular occupation, by which I think that this means a regular professional occupation with a regular salary, which corresponds to a reasonable standard of living, which covers all living costs and necessities as well as obligations to the state, such as taxes and all matters of security, including insurance, as is necessary and sometimes required by law here on Earth.
You understand very well how to formulate the facts correctly in a few words. And what you say also corresponds to my sense regarding the taking up regular wage work, wage employment, or professional practice as it is written here.
Thank you for your explanation. So, I am on the right track, and I have understood the whole thing correctly. But I still have to clarify these things with Quetzal, although I think that perhaps a better wording or an addition is necessary to clear up ambiguities and misunderstandings.
I suppose so, if misunderstandings have arisen as a result.
The question to you is how we should handle point 4 of Article 9 of the statutes correctly, and how we should relate it to point A of Article 13, but also to Article 34, 1b, as can be seen from this fax from Christian Freiner. If you would like to read his explanatory statement.
Quetzal reads fax from Christian F.
As I have correctly understood from Florina's and your and Christian's statement, it is a matter of not understanding the interpretation of Article 9 in relation to point 4, concerning the taking up regular paid employment or professional practice, and the resulting financial contribution obligation. The following is to be explained. Regular wage labor wage employment means that there must be regular work and a regular wage income corresponding to a level that allows for a complete livelihood and all other unavoidable expenses. So my explanation corresponds to what you and Florina have already discussed and explained in other words.
So it is not right to set and demand a financial contribution if the factors you have outlined are not met. If now Art 9.4 says, minors are members of a core group of 49 of FIGU, or a SCG secondary core group, who are in vocational training become financially liable for contributions only after their final training and after taking up regular wage work, CHAS employment, or vocational training, then this means that first of all a regular work and a regular remuneration must be given before a financial obligation to contribute can take effect. If regular work must first be created in such a wise, for example, if an establishment in the profession must first be worked out so that a regular payment can be made from it, then the obligation to make regular contributions is not necessary until a regular work and a regular income emerge from it. And if the income then exceeds the so-called subsistence minimum, as we call it, that is to say, a financial amount that exceeds the subsistence level, only then does the financial obligation to contribute become due. In this context, I have understood Art 9.4 of the statutes, but in addition there is Art 34(1)(b), according to which a release or reduction of the financial obligation can then be decided.
Your interpretation is correct, because this is how the whole thing is actually to be understood and handled. In my opinion, everything is clearly and unambiguously in accordance with the correctness of Art 9.4, but this is apparently not judged correctly in understanding. Rationality and logic, but only interpreted superficially, whereby thoughts and feelings based on false hopes as well as on lasting resentment probably play a role. It is probably necessary that Art 9.4 be slightly reworded so that there are no more misunderstandings, because such misunderstandings are obviously given, according to what Florina reported to me. So I direct you to extend point 4 in the following wise. Minors or FIGU members of a core group of 49 or a SCG in vocational training only become financially liable to pay contributions after their final training. If they take up regular or extensive wage, work, employment, or professional practice, which guarantees a regulated and the subsistence needs securing remuneration. If an establishment in the profession and thus also in the remuneration must first take place, then the obligation to make a financial contribution only comes into effect when the establishment in the profession and the regulated remuneration has taken place such that the entire subsistence needs are guaranteed, whereby under certain circumstances Art 34(1)(b) must be taken into account.
We will adhere to that and will rewrite the text.
Then everything is probably discussed and the problem is solved. So I want to say goodbye again, and also from my side I want to point out once more that you should hold back with regard to your work performance and allow yourself much more rest. So farewell then, dear friend. Sometime we will meet again, therefore goodbye.
Goodbye, and thank you for your words, Quetzal, my friend. And goodbye again.
So, Edouard, dear friend, now I want to send you greetings from my 2 daughters and from all your friends.
Oh, extend to them my heartfelt thanks and also give them my best wishes. Very often I think of them all, and very often I regret very much that they are so far away from here. Maybe I will see some of them again before I go my last way.
If nothing unforeseen happens, then there is the possibility of one or the other reunions.
Excuse me. Here I am again. Because I forgot to mention that you, my friend, when you discuss the whole thing again, which you will do, as Florina told me, you have to point out that the decision to be taken by the whole group is a violation of Art 9.4, because as I was informed by Florina, a discussion has taken place about where a wrong decision would have been taken with completely wrong arguments and a misunderstanding, with a profound violation of the statutes. That is what I still have to say and what needs to be thought about thoroughly so that further wrong decisions and violations of the statutes do not occur in any wise. Goodbye, my friend, and see to it that the matter is dealt with in accordance with the statutes. Each member of the group should be careful to take a close look at the statutes and interpret them as they are given. Consequently, there should not be any interpretations of their own which are false and, moreover, based on unworthy addenda and illusory hopes, as was the case, as Florina told me, who followed everything closely and reported to me. Farewell and take care of your health.
Thank you for coming back here and making everything a little clearer. Goodbye and thanks again. Well, Ptah, then I would like to ask you if you have any more predictions that are extraordinary?
I actually have something that will happen in about 25 hours. Because it turns out that an asteroid with an average size of 23.75 meters will cross the Earth's orbit at a distance of about 163,000 kilometers, at a speed of almost 32,000 kilometers per hour. And as I promised you a long time ago, this time you will be able to observe the events up close. Unfortunately, I do not have time to fly to the asteroid myself, but Florina will pick you up sometime after midnight the following night and fly to the asteroid with you so that you can observe it up close.
This is a surprise that I did not expect, but I am very happy, because I have never been able to observe an asteroid passing by Earth and also so close. Then I will be ready for the coming night. Yes, the whole thing will not take long, I suppose.
You will have about 20 minutes to observe, but that will be enough to give you a nice spectacle.
Thanks, Ptah, dear friend, for giving me this opportunity after all. It is truly a great pleasure. Do you have any other interesting things to report?
Yes, I do, but first I would like to talk about the Goblet of the Truth, the introduction, the preface, and the epilogue. In my opinion, it would make sense if you could also make a free brochure out of it, which you could use as advertising material for this important work and also distribute at your information booths, as well as extending it to the South German Study Group with its information booths. My wish is also that each part of the preface should be marked with the name of the author, because I think that is important. If possible, the contributions for the foreword should be left as they are drafted, so that a contribution should only be rewritten in extreme cases. That is to say, when formulation difficulties arise in the drafts. The individuality of each member should, however, be maintained.
We will keep that in mind. But there is something else that comes to mind, which we have talked about for a moment, and it is a plant that can cure certain mental illnesses. In particular, you spoke of depression, which can be reduced and even cured by certain substances in the plant.
I remember that. You were talking about the plant amaranth, the Amaranthaceae, of which there are several species and which mainly grow in warm regions of the earth. Juices, ashes, pastes, and pulverized components of the plant, flowers, leaves, stems, and also roots contain various psychoactive substances depending on the plant species, as well as proteins, iron, magnesium, lime and phosphorus, etc. The different active ingredients of the various amaranth plants have great healing effects in relation to depression, but also contain valuable active ingredients that are very effective in the case of nutritional deficiency or osteoporosis. Certain active ingredients are also very useful against muscle pain, and some species also contain high concentrations of the amino acid tryptophan, which is converted by the human organism into the so-called happiness hormone serotonin, which is very effective against depressive states. The different active ingredients of the various types of amaranth can be used in many different manners and with different effects, but there are also different forms of production. For example, a certain juice of amaranth can have a blood purifying and regulating effect on menstruation, while the root of a different kind, dried and pulverized as a hallucinogen, does its job when smoked. If a special paste is made from certain parts of amaranth and eaten, it causes a temporary state of mental retardation, while other parts of another type of amaranth can be used to treat and cure hallucinations. Burnt to ashes, parts of the plant can also be mixed with tobacco and used as psychoactive snuff. I will not say more about this.
You think because of the abuse by drug addicts and drug manufacturers and so on?
That is what I am actually thinking about. But also about the scientists who have to do their own work in relation to the successes of research and the progress to be gained from it, which can only be gained through a self-creation and can lead to further and continuing knowledge.
In other words, that everything must be self-created if it is to lead to success and progress and real development, which is not the case with template knowledge.
That is the meaning of my words.
Good. Then I have copied the following from the 21st Simyase volume here. Here is another question if you want to lend me your ear. Quetzal once told me that certain non-human creatures like animals or monkeys, etc., know about themselves. Do you know anything about that?
Quetzal's statement is true, but it should not be understood that all these non-human beings are part of a consciousness-based development, as is the case with humans. They are well aware of themselves, but not as an actual individual in the form of a single being in its own particularity, as is consciously inherent in humans.
Wait a minute. For this to be true, it must also be understood that every individual is a being that is primarily defined by the fact that he or she can be a part of other things, or all things of the same species, and can participate in them. This applies to families, groups, and herds, etc. of animals as well as to tribes, families, groups, and societies of humans. Each individual, as the bearer of the idea of creation, is in an overarching context, both with its own genus or species and with all other genera and species, because an overall cooperation of all individuals of all genera and species exists and is of importance. This applies to humans as well as to the entire fauna and flora. Yes, the value of the individual is determined precisely by what they are capable of in their particularity. And this is regardless of whether or not they are aware of their own particularity and genus or species. Thus, each individual proves their greatness and value by the extent to which they are capable of recognizing the leanings of their development and acting on them. Is this correct?
Your explanation is correct.
I have two more questions about this. That certain mammals know about their own existence is as clear as the fact that they do not develop in a consciousness-based manner in the same wise as humans. Yes, mammals and also various other animals only have an instinct consciousness and can only develop in an instinct consciousness-based manner, but not in a conscious consciousness-based manner. At least that is what I understand according to Quetzal's and your explanations. But now the question has arisen in me, if that, the fact that mammals and certain animals know about themselves, is a form of ego consciousness. At least that is what I assume, because I think that such an ego consciousness in mammals and animals must be an instinct ego consciousness. In my opinion, however, this would mean that they must also be capable of instinct-based thought processes, because in my opinion, it is only through such that mammals and animals can have forms of feelings and also a psyche. So there must be an ego consciousness, at least in an instinct-based form, because otherwise how else could it be that certain mammals and certain animals can be aware of themselves?
What you think is right.
Yes. Then the other question. Yes, the fact is that humans speak different languages and dialects, depending on the countries and regions. Thus, I imagine that mammals and the animals also speak, as it were, different languages and dialects depending on the regions. which means that two identical mammal or animal life forms cannot communicate with each other if they come from two different regions far apart. The forms of communication between mammals and animals, I suppose, can very well be called languages and dialects.
This interpretation is also correct, because the mammal and the animal each have their own forms of communication according to regions, which can very well be termed mammal and animal languages and dialects. So it is also the case that mammals and animals of the same species cannot communicate with one another when they come from other regions of the planet and meet, because one form of communication or language of the one is a foreign form of communication or foreign language for the other. But it is a fact that the mammals and the animals can also learn other forms of communication or language than their own when they are brought together or somehow come together.
It is kind of like when humans learn foreign languages. But is it also possible that mammals and animals of one species understand the language or form of communication of another species?
This is indeed the case.
And what is the relationship between pets and humans?
In a certain wise, they understand certain words of humans, but the tone of voice with which they speak is also of enormous importance. So pets can actually memorize certain words of humans because they are used to them. But the tone of voice of humans plays an important role in this, as well as the treatment and training in which the pet is involved.
Yes, the linguistic ability of humans to communicate is fundamentally different from that with which mammals and animals communicate with each other. That is actually all I wanted to ask and have answered. So now you can come to the predictions, where I would like to know if you know anything about the weather at Easter.
There is not much to tell. This year there will be a lot of snow around Easter time. Tibet, and Lhasa in particular, is plagued by great political and religious unrest by the population directed against China, with the numerous monks also heavily involved, proving that they are not as peaceful as they claim to be. The reason for the bloody and destructive riots is taken as the upcoming Olympic Games, which are a welcome means of stirring up the world against China, which of course fights back harshly and ruthlessly, costing a large number of human lives. The mastermind or originator for this is the Dalai Lama, who in his low intelligentum works politically and domineeringly underhandedly and thereby causes the unrest, whereby he, as it is usual for a wolf in sheep's clothing, handles everything such that nothing can be proven against him. I attribute low intelligentum to the Dalai Lama because he is not able to assess what he instigates underhandedly, cannot take stock of it, and cannot foresee the consequences. Consequently, he irresponsibly carries out his underhanded work in such a manner, he is so clever again, that he only works on his followers and special helpers and messengers verbally with his incitements and puts nothing in writing, so that nothing can be proven against him. Through his policy as leader of the exiled government and spiritual leader, he has great influence and great power over his followers who worship him as a deity, so that he can direct his followers according to his plans and his will, without them realizing his deceitful goals, which are to become the undisputed political and spiritual ruler of Tibet and to secede it from China as independent. The Dalai Lama's supporters deliberately overlook the fact that he displays political power, as well as the fact that he drives his followers with his infamous actions into hardship and misery, and even often to their deaths, which is completely irrelevant to him and is calculatedly included in his actions. Officially, he is hypocritical and calls for moderation and peace, while he is deceitfully and underhandedly inciting his followers and believers to resistance against China and to rebellion and unrest. He does this in a kind and wise that in his low intelligentum he himself does not recognize as what it really is, namely that he is a religious and political rebel, who by his actions and conduct drives his believing people mad and into affliction, and leads them into misery and into continuing enmity against China. He succeeds in this very easily because China does not enjoy a good reputation all over the world and is engaged in many inhuman and human-contemptuous machinations. And the Dalai Lama, in his stupidity and in his striving for power, is not able to estimate what he is doing to his believers with regard to what is happening to them in affliction, misery and harm by China's brutal and murderous measures. Because the Chinese rulers are not squeamish and allow evil and out-of-control violence to be used, as has been customary in China since time immemorial. As in old times for the Chinese rulers, a human life had no meaning at all, except their own, as it is also still today. Consequently, they allow brutal, unscrupulous, and conscienceless murder as well as irresponsible murder, and thus assert themselves in their offices.
This is as familiar to me as his misogyny, but he knows how to hide it. So there is stink in Tibet, and as you say, especially in the capital Lhasa. I do not think much of the methods of coercion used by the government and the murderous actions of the Chinese government against enemies of the regime and those who think differently, as well as criminals, etc., because all in all, it is inhuman and degrading. However, what the Dalai Lama does with the believing people falls into the same category, because through his false religious, political, and world political machinations, he lets the believers run into the open knife with the Chinese. He talks loudly about peace while he deceitfully seduces the faithful to resist China instead of honestly trying to reach a compromise with China by giving up his autocratic and unjustified claims of being the political ruler of Tibet and its people. He should be content to be the spiritual leader of the Tibetans who believe in him, who worship him like a god, and believe that the sun will not shine if he resigns as leader of the political religious government in exile, as a Tibetan recently told me when I was talking to him in the waiting room at the doctor's office. These people are so misled by the Dalai Lama and his false speeches that they cannot understand what is really going on, and that he is the mastermind behind the fact that there has been a political conflagration between Tibet and China for a long time, that there is murder and manslaughter, riots, destruction, bloodshed and terror on both sides, both by the Chinese and by the Tibetans themselves, with the supposedly peaceful monks also involved. If the Dalai Lama were to do his duty as spiritual leader, he would not be involved in politics and would not have ambitions as a political leader. If he were who he claims to be, he would be striving for true love and peace, and would be trying to find a peaceful solution with China by withdrawing himself as political leader and renouncing any political activity. With that, he would also save the lives of many of his believers and give them a better life, because by such an action he would save the Tibetan people from exposing themselves to the murderous machinations of the Chinese rulers when they cause riots and uprisings. Although this would not make Tibet a state in its own right, it would lead to a compromise peace that could last until the balance of power in China changes in such a wise that one day Tibet's independence can be negotiated peacefully with responsible and humane Chinese leaders, and that this independence can actually be achieved. However, as long as the Tibetan people are still controlled by a Dalai Lama who is greedy for political power and is not prepared to make the necessary compromise, much disaster will continue to befall the misguided Tibetans.
Unfortunately, this is indeed the case, and not only in Lhasa, because Tibetans in exile will also demonstrate worldwide and cause material damage, for which they will have to bear the consequences, although their actions cannot be compared with the violence and destruction that will be a reality in Lhasa. It will also unfortunately be the case that the Olympic Games will be heavily politically exploited by the Tibetan and Chinese powers, and that various powers and their followers in the world will unreasonably and stupidly call for a boycott of the Games in China, not knowing what damage they will cause.
Even this, but has already happened in 1980.
Unfortunately, as usual, It is not thought about and acted on rationally and not far enough, but only childishly, as it is also done by very many rulers who ask themselves why they were elected to their office at all, since they are completely unsuitable for it.
I think the simple answer to that question is that those who vote are as equally irrational and lowly intelligent as those who cheer and vote for them. Good rulers, on the other hand, are demoralized and voted out of office by the irrational ones who wallow in low intelligentum, as happened with Christoph Blocher, the only real federal councillor Switzerland has had for a very long time. But as the saying goes, stupidity and irrationality know no limits.
What happened in this regard is really very regrettable, and it is incomprehensible how so many inexperienced politicians can hold office in the Swiss government who, out of partisanship and personally wrong opinions, and in not recognizing the true value of this man, Christoph Blocher, were able to act so wrongly and irresponsibly through a party conspiracy. He was the man who could have re-established an acceptable order in Switzerland's politics and the entire governance of the state, and made the state once again what Switzerland, as a neutral country and in terms of law, order, and worldwide reputation, should be fundamentally. Values which were lost some time ago and which are causing all remaining values to sink further by those in the government and in the parties who betray the country of Switzerland and all its praiseworthiness, and do everything in their power to drive the country ever further into the dictatorial clutches of the European Union. And the fact that the wrong policies and the high-handed actions of the highest rulers are also damaging Switzerland's reputation and even creating certain enmities is an inevitable consequence, as will become apparent in the coming weeks and even later.
These are good and clear words, which I would like to quote in response to a bulletin reader's question.
For which you have a free hand as usual. But now, dear friend, it is time for me to go again. Goodbye, and do not overdo it with your work again.
You can rest assured, because I am following Florena's instructions. Goodbye.
This is good. Goodbye.